Stalin's economic policies. Industrialization. 5-year plans. A central aim of Stalin was to industrialize Russia. NEP made some economic advances, but Russia still lagged behind Europe. The 5-year plans took break away from the NEP and bring about rapid industrialization to modernize the economy and bring in socialism. The plan was to turn a backward peasant-based country into a modern urban and industrial-based country. Reasons for 5-year plan. Fear of foreign invasion. The launching of the plan in 1928 was based on economic factors, political factors, and the fear of invasion. Despite NEP's progress, Russia was still behind, producing less coal and steel than France in the 1920s. To survive a capitalist invasion, the USSR needed to be stronger. Memories of Britain, France, USA, and Japan giving help to the whites in the Civil War seemed to boost suspicion of capitalist West invasion in the future. These fears came to surface in 1927 when a series of events were seen as evidence for a future attack. 1927, a raid by the British government on the Soviet trade mission in London. In China, communists were attacked by the Kuomintang forces of Chiang Kai-shek. A Soviet diplomat was assassinated in Poland. The Soviet government presented these as evidence of an anti-Soviet conspiracy. In these circumstances, it was easy to argue that the Soviet Union would need to be prepared for war to survive. As Stalin stated, "We are 50 to 100 years behind the advanced countries. We must make good this distance in 10 years. Either we do it, or we shall be crushed." Industrialization was seen as necessary to survive an impending war, thus making it patriotic and formed an important part in Stalin's cry for socialism in one country. With Germany's state after the Wall Street crash in 1929, and with Hitler's growing support with his anti-communist statements, provided a further incentive for the successful completion of the 5-year plans as the 1930s wore on. Economic reasons. Fear of invasion added extra weight to the economic reasons for the plans. Under NEP, industrialization production remained poor to many in the Communist Party. 1926, industrialization reached levels of pre-war production in many sectors, but it was still far from what it could have been. World War I and the Civil War damaged Russia's infrastructure in industry, and essential services such as distribution remained haphazard. Soviet production figures were still far below the rest of modern Western Europe. State control under the 5-year plan would enable the Soviets to direct the economy and ensure the needed production and distribution of essential materials, being food to support industrial and urban growth. With the direction and the control of the economic resources, they could be maximized. Since Soviet takeover in 1917, trade with the rest of the world had been severely reduced, making the Soviet Union to rely on its own resources. State control would ensure the full potential of these resources, which would be realized to bring about rapid industrialization. Political reasons. The economic reasons were secondary compared to the political reasons. To all Communist Party members, industrialization was seen as necessary to ensure the survival of the revolution. It was believed socialism and the Communist Party would not survive in a non-industrial society, making it essential to have rapid industrialization. Industrialization would create many more proletariat members, the backbone of the revolution. Industrialization was therefore seen as a form of social engineering. The 5-year plan with large-scale nationalization and state control would get rid of netmen, private business owners and traders who survived under the NEP. As people who made profit from their trade, the netmen were seen as capitalist class enemies who presented a reminder of the old world and its values. Socialism couldn't survive with these class enemies lurking within. The capitalist elements concerned with selfish gains needed to be wiped out, and the 5-year plan would achieve this. Stalin's role in launching the 5-year plans. Stalin may have used these policies to strengthen his own personal position as leader. After defeating Trotsky and the left, he adopted their ideas on industrialization without compromising his own position. After the left were neutralized, the right were in a stronger position, but could be sidelined if NEP was abandoned. The right, led by Bukharin, Tomsky and Rykov, were for the NEP, arguing that forcing collectives would make a decline in food production. 1928, Stalin argued that the NEP should go as it was holding back the step to industrialisation. The launching of the 5-year plan saw the removal of the right in early 1929, as well as the extension of state-controlled planning agencies. It increased Stalin's power. Stalin's motives of abandoning NEP present Stalin as a scheming opportunist interested in personal power. This is a clinical viewpoint, very self-interested. However, the right didn't pose a serious threat. It is much more likely that it was pronouncing or articulating the views of majority of party members. Rather than working on personal motives, Stalin was reacting to the pressure of rank-and-file members of the Communist Party. Attitudes of rank-and-file communists. The launching of the 5-year plan was seen as revolution from above, but can be seen as revolution from below. Rank-and-file communist attitudes pushed Stalin towards large-scale industrialization, many rank-and-file communists being disillusioned with the revolution as the 20s wore on. The targets of their frustration was people who made benefits of the NEP. The netmen kulaks and bourgeois experts were seen as reminders of the old world. Many rank-and-file communists praised the Civil War as the good old days, as then they had something to fight for. The dissatisfaction grew, and Stalin saw the chance to strengthen his position by aligning himself with these views. Rapid industrialization would sweep away the remains of the old world and move towards a socialist framework and remove rank-and-file tensions. The policy was loosely war-based and would appeal to those who fought in the Civil War. These attitudes' strength became apparent when the plan was implemented. Party officials usually applied the new policies with more force than the government intended. Stalin's drive for industrialization and collectivization was popular with the party and secured his position as leader. Stalin strengthened his position with the policies of the 5-year plans, enabling him to extend his overall control, which were popular with the rank and file. These were launched in the need to ensure the survival of the revolution, which would befit the party as well as the leader. Implementation of the plans. Abandonment of NEP and the launch of industrialization was made in 1928 to be directed by Gosplan, the state planning authority. Targets were set for specific industries for having a priority in modernization, and resources were allocated accordingly. First 5-year plan, 1928 to 1932, concentrated in heavy industry such as coal, steel and iron, using Prebransky's and economic theorist ideas. Stalin didn't acknowledge this though. Consumers, industries, textiles and household goods neglected. Focusing on heavy industry was consequence to the Soviet Union had to face. The original justification for the first 5-year plan was fair, as it focused on building an industrial infrastructure of factories, plants and communications before other sectors could flourish. Second 5-year plan, 1933 to 1937, originally set targets for consumer goods, but as the 30s progressed, so did Hitler's rise in Germany, which then set targets for defence, which meant heavy industry continued to receive priority. The third 5-year plan, 1938 onwards, geared directly towards arms production in order to meet the threat of Germany in 1941. The Nazi-Soviet pact with Hitler allowed Stalin to get the 3 years he needed before he could enter the Second World War. This was vital in the 5-year plans. Results of the 5-year plans. Successes. Stalin with the plan was able to transform the USSR into a major industrial power. There was an expansion of Soviet Russia's old industrial areas like Moscow and Leningrad, with new industrial centres built. There was around 1,500 new power stations, factories and metalworking companies built during the first 5-year plan. Some aspects of industry saw major growth, such as iron ore, chemical industry and energy industry and iron ore production. Also, steel went from 4 million tonnes to 18 million, and coal from 36 million tonnes to 130 million. By 1937, 80% of the industrial output in the Soviet Union came from factories that were built since the first 5-year plan. They built thousands of miles of railways and also built canals. Industrialization led to a growth in the industrial proletariat, growing by 38% between 1926 and 1933. So this strengthened the strength of the communism in Russia. 100 new cities and towns were built, most famously Magnitogorsk. Magnitogorsk was built in southwest Siberia, mainly based on iron and steel. This city was built from scratch, with only 25 workers living in it in 1929 to 250,000 in 1932. In the early years of construction, the conditions were horrible, which led to many deaths. The workers also lived in huts or tents eating black bread made from rye. There were incentives to encourage workers, such as being rewarded with a new flat or bigger rations. Stakhanov was used as an example of a model worker who mined 15 times the average of coal in one shift than the average worker would, which was 102 tons compared to just the high aim of 9. This led to the Stakhanovite movement, which tapped into the enthusiasm of young workers to increase the work rate in factories. The development of new industrial bases in the east of the Ural Mountains made it possible for the USSR to withstand the Nazi invasion in 1941. Failures. Stalin set very unrealistic targets for the industries. Failure to achieve these targets led to the accusations of lack of commitment and sabotage. This led to corruption, bribery, and fiddling with the figures in industries. Anyone found guilty or accused were put on a show trial, which were mainly against bourgeois experts. The Shakhny trial in 1928 saw 53 engineers being accused of wrecking industrial equipment. Only 5 of them were executed, and then the Metrovik trial 1933 saw British people working in Russia being accused of foreign sabotage. High target led industries to be focused in quantity over quality, which could lead to problems in the future. The textile industry declined and oil industry did not do well. There was very poor living and working conditions with poor safety, limited training and low pay. The workers were not able to leave their work as the passport system was introduced in 1932. In 1939, absenteeism became a criminal offence with potential execution as a result. Absenteeism was defined as being 20 minutes late without good reason. The Soviets had a use of slave labour in labour camps. The Stakhanovite movement also caused tensions, as the drive to succeed could cause disruption. There is evidence of some men tinkering with machines to improve output. This could cause machines to break down and cause accidents. Summary. Economic. There was an emphasis on heavy industry. They had a 6-fold increase in coal production and a 4-fold increase in steel production. There was chaotic implementation and increased corruption. They built new large industrial centres. The Soviets had a decline in textile production and began to neglect consumer goods. Social. There was a decline in working conditions, being safety measures with a low pay rate. Workers had great discontent and poor living and working conditions, and discontent arose with the introduction of the passport system in 1938 to prevent workers from leaving. The Soviets used slave labour to overcome labour shortages. There was a huge increase in the number of industrial proletariat workers. Political. The control of the Communist Party strengthened through the organizations of industrial workers. Industrialisation and collectivization got rid of capitalist classes such as the netmen and bourgeois experts. They had an expansion of government's role in the economy through the central planning. Stalin strengthened his own personal position, as those who opposed the 5-year plan were removed.